And to know more on the new direct tax code bill, we are joined in our studio by Dr. Surana, founder of RSM Astute Consulting Group. A very good afternoon and welcome to Business Bulletin, Dr. Surana. Now, talking about the new direct tax code bill that was introduced yesterday in the Parliament, how do you look at it? What are the, quick, if we ask your reactions on the kind of changes that have been made?
Well, the direct taxes code, is the most comprehensive direct tax reform what we are seeing in the last 50 years. So there have been a lot of expectations from this new bill. Now, if you really see what the finance minister has done, he has actually chosen the path of stability and continuity rather than indulging into any path breaking or tax reforms. So most of the cases you will find that some of the provisions which earlier were talking about in the initial direct taxes code was to increase the tax slabs in a very liberal manner. I mean, with the highest rate going for income exceeding rupees 25 lakhs, and also the in terms of change of system of EEE of the savings to EET system have been dropped. So actually the finance minister has chosen to continue the current tax regime with some changes and some reforms, but not a fundamental recasting of the direct tax laws.
Definitely, if we we've ended that simpler income tax code now, how do you look at the new one? As in, when we talk about common man, the things that he keeps in mind is now for men and women. Earlier we had a heated debate on how much would be for men and how much would be for women. We had this 1.6 and 1.9 lakh respectively, but now it is 2 lakh. It is the same for men and women. How do you look at this change?
That's right, but I don't think really it makes such a huge difference, because in the overall context of the things, I mean, the basic exemption limit has been increased to 2 lakh rupees. Also, if you see that the ATC deduction, what is available up to rupees 1 lakh, has been continued. There is 1 lakh rupees deduction available for specified saving instruments, and for the life insurance premium there is an additional deduction of 50,000 rupees available. So I think on the whole he has tried to ensure that whatever is the current tax situation is continued, although in case of women the preferential treatment what they were enjoying earlier is withdrawn to that extent. I mean, there is a disappointment for the women and particularly those who are working women. It could make marginal difference in my view.
All right, now, obviously for working women, they would be a little disappointed with that common slap put out there. But if you also talk about senior citizens, their relief given to them as well, 2.5 is the cut out there for them, and also a few other additional reductions done. So how do you look at that? A welcome change?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that continuation is a welcome change. There is no issue in that. I mean, I don't see any problem with that.
All right, now if you also talk about the Companies Act, we have 30% on the corporate taxes, and MAT on book profit is now 20%. How do you look at this kind of a change?
Yeah, I mean, if you see the current tax rate for companies, it is 33.22%, and that is being reduced to 30%. Of course, in the initial direct tax code, there was a proposal to reduce it to as low as 25%, which would have been really like a radical reform. But I think given the fiscal deficit situation, I mean, if you see this year also the fiscal deficit is in the range of 4.5 to 5%. I think we don't really have the time to indulge into such radical reforms in the interest of overall fiscal stability and consolidation. I think this is a fair balance what has been struck in my view.
All right, now across sectors we've seen fair balance done by the finance ministry there, as you said earlier also. Now talking about stock investors, what kind of an benefit is being given to them, and how do you look at people who want to invest in stocks as well?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the investors are concerned, there is a lot to be sort of cheerful about. As you know that at present long-term capital gains, which means if you are holding the shares for more than 12 months and if you sell it through the stock exchange, there is no tax on that. The initial draft of the direct tax code had proposed that this will be taxed at normal rates. Subsequently also in the revised discussion about a month back, there was a proposal that these will be taxed between rate which are ranging from 9 to 15%. Now, as against that, the long-term capital gains will continue to be exempt, which is I think a big sigh of relief. Also the short-term capital gain, which are currently taxed at the rate of 15%, will be now taxed at 50% of the normal rate. So that means effectively it would be 5, 10 or 15%. So I think to that extent, as far as the retail investors are concerned, that is a beneficial thing. The dividend distribution tax continues at 15%, so there is no increase there. Only in case of mutual fund, there is an additional 5% dividend distribution tax, which will probably, to that extent, will be a little bit of disadvantage for mutual funds. But the logic for that is that all these funds are required to only invest 65% in equities. So they could have 35% in non-equity instruments, and that's why this, probably 5% tax is there.
Definitely. But the mutual fund, what do you think is rational for the government? What should they do on taxation on the mutual funds?
Yeah, I mean, initially the indication was that the direct tax code will promote these collective investment vehicles like mutual funds, and it will make them completely pass through, which means there will be no tax, additional tax, as if the investor had directly invested into the equities. So to that extent, there was an expectation that there will be no dividend distribution tax as far as the equity oriented are concerned. However, in the final bill, what we see now, there is a 5% tax. The only logic which we can see is that because these funds invest a minimum of 65% in the equities, so there could be 35% in non-equity instruments, and therefore to that extent, if you count 1/3 of 15%, that is probably what comes to 5%. I mean, that is the only logic which we can see.
Definitely. Now the good news is that a date is being set for the implementation of this new direct tax code. Earlier there was this heated debate on when would it be implemented, but now taking into consideration that the date is set, do you think some more changes would be done by then, because it's like in 2012?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite possible, because if you see now, the bill will be examined by the standing committee also, and thereafter it will be finally passed by Parliament. So there could be some, particularly those areas where things have been clearly, sort of, which are not equitable, or clearly there are gaps, because when such a major legislative change is there, there could be areas which are left out. It will give the opportunity to do that calibration, in my view.
Definitely. If you ask you, according to your analysis, your study on this new direct tax code, which would be that area that probably the ministry would touch before finally implementing it, if at all there are changes made in this new direct tax code before it finally comes in?
I think a few areas. One is that right now the principal amount, if you pay for housing loan repayment, now there is no deduction which is proposed under the direct tax code, which at present up to 1 lakh rupees you can get deduction under section 80C. So while they have continued to allow interest on housing loan if it is self-occupied property up to 1.5 lakhs, so there is a case, because a lot of people who want to go for housing need this kind of tax benefit, and with the basic exemption limit not going up much, there is a case for that. The second area is that all the charitable trusts now are proposed to be taxed at 15% when their income is exceeding 1 lakh rupees, which right now is entirely tax free. Now there is going to be a lot of hue and cry from those sections to restore the exemption, or maybe make some other changes in that. Similarly, there are some provisions which have come on the general anti-avoidance rules and the controlled foreign company CFC regulations. That means where Indians are owning overseas companies, and so these are all far-reaching changes. Probably far too much powers have been given right now to the tax administration, and there might be some sort of checks and balances introduced as we go along.
Definitely checks and balances introduced as we go ahead from here. Like you also mentioned a few sectors there which would see changes, if at all changes are implemented there. Now talking about home loans alone, because this is one thing which majorly interests a common man, and probably he looks forward to whether his home loan is not touched there, where he doesn't have a additional burden on that. So how do you look at this in specific, if we talk about, because real estate in this all these throughout this period that we've seen, real estate has gone high, banks have been increasing interest rates. How do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That is the point we were discussing earlier, that as the basic exemption limit is also increased only from 1.6 lakhs to 2 lakhs. The interest on housing loan as far as the deduction is concerned is retained at 1.5 lakhs. But one area which has not been sort of carried forward, or which benefit is not being continued, is the principal amount when you repay the loan. And many of the people housing loans up to 1 lakh rupees deduction was allowed under section 80C, which is not proposed under the new direct taxes code. So I think that will really adversely impact people who are at least in the low income housing group, who want to go for the housing loans.
Definitely. If you also talk about the DTC, the direct tax code, the new direct tax code, what the ministry was proposing, the finance ministry, was that they wanted to simultaneously even roll out the GST. So now that we've set a deadline for this, do you see that happening soon?
Well, I would think that as far as the direct access code is concerned, it was entirely within the purview of the central government to decide the date. And I mean, they could have brought it even from April 1, 2011. The GST is a far more complex legislation. You require all the state government concurrence, you require constitutional amendments, you require to put in place the IT infrastructure, the set-off mechanisms. So I think GST is a much bigger, I would say, exercise as compared to the direct access code. And to that extent, I am little concerned that the fact that the direct access code has been pushed back by 1 year. I mean, GST again, we could see a further deferment, and that probably everybody is really waiting for this major tax reforms. So I think to that extent it may not be that good a news.
Definitely. So we would definitely say here that it's not safe enough to say that by 2012 we may also see the GST rolling out.
Yeah, possibly yes, maybe earlier, but we have to just see, because it's a much bigger exercise as we talked about.
All right, so thank you so much for joining us and giving us all those inputs.
Thank you.
Studio. All right, let's now move ahead and